I remember the day I received the offer like it was yesterday. It was a dreary afternoon, and I was sitting in my office, sifting through endless blueprints and architectural plans, when an email pinged into my inbox. The subject line read, "Restoration Opportunity, Private Island Mansion." Normally, I would have dismissed such an out-of-the-blue offer, but something about it caught my attention. Maybe it was the timing, or maybe it was the unusual location, an old Victorian mansion on a remote island. Whatever it was, I found myself opening the email before I had even finished my coffee. The terms were strange, to say the least. The client was anonymous, with the entire transaction managed through a high-end law firm in New York. The contract promised an exorbitant fee, far beyond what I usually charged, with one condition. I had to work alone. No crew, no assistants. They'd handle the materials and anything else I needed. All I had to do was restore the mansion to its original state. I thought it was odd but intriguing, the kind of project that could make my name even more recognized. After a brief hesitation, I replied with my acceptance. The response came almost immediately, providing me with all the necessary details, including a departure date that was only a week away. The trip to the island was uneventful at first. The boat ride was long, but the weather was calm. Still, I couldn't shake a sense of unease that had settled in my gut the moment the island came into view. The mansion stood at the island's highest point, surrounded by dense woods, like a grand yet decaying sentinel. Even from a distance, it looked as though it had been left to rot for decades, its once majestic facade now crumbling under the weight of time and neglect. But that wasn't what bothered me. It was the way the fog clung to the shoreline, almost like it was trying to keep the island hidden from the world. I remember laughing at myself, brushing it off as just nerves and anticipation. As I stepped onto the dock, a cold wind whipped through the trees, making the branches creak and groan as if the forest itself was alive. The path up to the mansion was overgrown, barely visible beneath layers of fallen leaves and moss. The air smelled damp, with a hint of something else, something I couldn't quite place, but that sent a shiver down my spine. I pushed the feeling aside and focused on the task ahead. I was here for a job, nothing more. The mansion was even more imposing up close. The stonework, though weathered, still bore the intricate details typical of Victorian architecture. Gargoyles perched on the corners of the roof, their stone eyes seeming to follow my every move as I approached the front door. I paused for a moment, taking it all in. The silence was almost deafening, broken only by the distant crash of waves against the rocks below. As I reached for the door handle, I noticed my hand was trembling. Again, I laughed it off, but the unease grew stronger. The door creaked loudly as I pushed it open, revealing a grand foyer that was both beautiful and tragic. Dust and cobwebs covered every surface, but the craftsmanship was undeniable. The staircase, with its ornate banister, wound up to the second floor, where darkness seemed to swallow everything beyond the first few steps. I set my bags down and stood there for a moment, trying to shake off the feeling that something was watching me. That's when I heard it, a faint whisper, so soft I wasn't sure if I had imagined it. "Welcome, Jack," it seemed to say, though I couldn't be sure. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I scanned the room, half expecting to see someone standing there, but I was alone. The house was silent once more, as if it had never spoken. Shaking my head, I tried to convince myself that it was just the wind, or maybe the old wood settling, but deep down, I knew better. I shrugged off my coat and got to work. The sooner I started, the sooner I could finish and get off this damned island. But as I began unpacking my tools, that uneasy feeling lingered, gnawing at the back of my mind. I tried to focus, but the house seemed to have other plans. Every creak of the floorboards, every groan of the old wood felt like a whisper in my ear, as if the mansion itself was trying to tell me something. By nightfall, I was exhausted but had made little progress. The mansion felt like it was fighting me, resisting every attempt I made to restore it. And the whispers, they hadn't stopped. They were still faint, barely audible, but constant. I kept telling myself it was all in my head, but the fear was beginning to take root, and no amount of rationalizing could shake it. As I lay in bed that first night, staring up at the cracked ceiling, I wondered what I had gotten myself into. The silence of the island was oppressive, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves outside. But just as I was about to drift off, I heard it again. The whisper, closer this time, almost right next to my ear. "Jack, you shouldn't have come." The next morning, I woke up feeling more drained than rested. My dreams had been vivid and disturbing, filled with fragmented images of the mansion's past. A woman screaming, a child crying, and always that same oppressive feeling of being watched. I shook off the remnants of sleep, trying to focus on the day ahead, but the unease from the night before clung to me like a shadow. I made myself a strong cup of coffee, hoping it would clear the fog in my head. As I sat at the dusty kitchen table, staring out at the thick woods surrounding the mansion, I felt a strange sense of isolation. It wasn't just that I was physically alone. I had worked solo on plenty of projects before. This was different. It was as if the mansion itself was alive, pulsating with a dark energy that made the air feel heavier, harder to breathe. Determined to push through, I grabbed my tools and headed to the main hall to start working on the restoration. But as soon as I laid out the blueprints, I noticed something odd. The floor plan didn't match what I had seen the day before. A corridor that should have led to the dining room now appeared to lead nowhere, ending in a blank wall. I traced the lines with my finger, my confusion growing. Was it a mistake in the plans? Had I simply misremembered the layout? I walked over to the corridor in question, only to find that it now extended further than I recalled, leading to a door I was certain hadn't been there before. Hesitantly, I approached the door, my pulse quickening. The wood was old, almost black with age, and the brass handle was tarnished, but it turned easily in my hand. The door creaked open to reveal a small, dimly lit room, empty except for a single chair in the center. The walls were bare, and the air was thick with dust. It felt wrong, like a place that had been sealed away for a reason. I took a step inside, and immediately, the temperature dropped. A chill ran down my spine as I realized how unnaturally cold the room was compared to the rest of the house. I stepped back, suddenly overwhelmed by a feeling of dread. It wasn't just the cold, it was the sense that I wasn't supposed to be there, that I had crossed some invisible boundary. I closed the door quickly, almost slamming it shut, and backed away. My mind raced with questions. How had this room gone unnoticed before? Had I simply overlooked it? But deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. The house was changing, shifting around me, and I had no control over it. Trying to shake off the unsettling experience, I returned to the foyer to continue my work. But the house seemed intent on disrupting me. The tools I had carefully placed on the floor had been moved, scattered around the room as if someone, or something, had been rifling through them. My irritation flared, but it was quickly replaced by a creeping fear. I was the only one here, or at least, I was supposed to be. I decided to take a break and get some fresh air, hoping it would clear my head. But as I stepped outside, I noticed something strange. The fog that had hugged the shoreline the day before had thickened, wrapping around the mansion like a shroud. The trees that lined the path to the dock seemed to loom closer, their branches twisting in unnatural shapes. The island felt smaller, more confined, as if it were closing in on me. I could barely make out the water beyond the mist, and the sky, once overcast, was now an oppressive gray, the sun hidden behind a thick layer of clouds. I didn't want to admit it, but I was starting to feel trapped. The unease that had been gnawing at me since I arrived was now a constant presence, an ever-growing weight on my chest. The isolation, which I had initially found appealing, was now suffocating. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of wind against the windows, felt like a warning, a reminder that I was not welcome here. That night, I found it even harder to sleep. The whispering had returned, more persistent than before, slipping through the walls and into my mind. This time, it wasn't just my name. I could hear fragments of sentences, disjointed and eerie, like a conversation just out of reach. "He's here. He knows. Finish it." The words repeated, over and over, until I thought I would go mad from the sound of it. I got out of bed, desperate to escape the voices, and wandered the dark hallways of the mansion. The floorboards creaked under my feet, each step echoing through the empty rooms. As I passed by the door to that strange, cold room, I felt a tug, a pull to open it again. I resisted at first, but the compulsion grew stronger, almost irresistible. With trembling hands, I reached for the handle and slowly opened the door. This time, the room wasn't empty. The chair was still there, but now, in front of it, a figure stood with its back to me. It was tall, its frame draped in old, tattered clothing that seemed to hang off its skeletal form. My breath caught in my throat as I realized that the figure wasn't just standing. It was swaying, as if it were hanging from the ceiling, its feet just inches off the ground. I wanted to run, to slam the door shut and never look back, but I couldn't move. My body was frozen, my mind trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Slowly, the figure turned its head towards me, revealing a face that was gaunt and hollow, the skin stretched tight over sharp bones. Its eyes, or what was left of them, were empty sockets that seemed to stare right through me. A cold, deathly whisper escaped its lips, chilling me to the core. "Leave before it's too late." The words echoed in my head long after I had slammed the door and stumbled back to my room, my heart racing and my mind in a frenzy. But I knew, deep down, that it was already too late. I was caught in something far beyond my understanding, and the mansion, this cursed, living mansion, wasn't going to let me go. I barely slept that night. The figure's hollow face and its chilling words haunted me every time I closed my eyes. I kept seeing its empty eye sockets, feeling the coldness of its whisper against my skin. By morning, I was a wreck, my nerves frayed, my mind teetering on the edge of panic. But I had no choice. I was trapped here, and the only way out was to finish the job. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. When I finally dragged myself out of bed, the mansion seemed different. The air was thicker, almost suffocating, and a strange smell lingered. Something old and decaying, like the stench of a long-forgotten grave. I tried to ignore it, to focus on the work, but my hands were shaking so badly that I could barely hold my tools. The house felt more alive than ever, its oppressive presence pressing down on me from all sides. Every creak, every groan of the old would send a spike of fear through my heart. As I resumed the restoration, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The walls seemed to pulse with a life of their own, and the shadows in the corners of the rooms appeared to move, shifting in ways that defied logic. I tried to keep my mind on the task at hand, but the mansion wouldn't let me. The whispers were back, louder now, echoing through the empty halls, bouncing off the walls. They weren't just calling my name anymore. They were demanding something, urging me to do something. But what? Hours passed in a blur. I barely noticed the sun sinking behind the clouds, plunging the island into an early, eerie twilight. The fog had thickened, curling around the mansion like a living thing, sealing me off from the outside world. By the time I realized how late it was, darkness had already settled in, and with it came a sense of dread so overwhelming that I could barely breathe. The house had grown colder, the temperature dropping to an unnatural chill that seeped into my bones. My breath puffed out in white clouds as I worked, but the cold was the least of my worries. I was deep in the mansion's bowels, trying to fix a collapsed section of the floor, when I heard it. A faint, rhythmic thudding sound, like something heavy being dragged across the floor above me. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The sound continued, slow and deliberate, each thud sending a tremor through the floorboards beneath me. I listened, straining to make sense of it, but the more I listened, the more it began to sound like footsteps. Heavy, dragging footsteps, moving with a purpose, coming closer. I told myself it was just the house settling, the old wood creaking under its own weight, but deep down, I knew better. The footsteps grew louder, echoing through the walls, until they stopped directly above me. For a long moment, there was silence, thick, suffocating silence, broken only by the rapid beating of my own heart. I didn't dare move, didn't dare breathe, waiting for whatever was up there to make the next move. And then, the ceiling above me groaned, like something heavy was being pressed down on it, causing the old wood to strain under the weight. Dust rained down, and I stumbled back, terror gripping me. The footsteps resumed, moving away, heading towards the staircase. I couldn't stay down there, couldn't be trapped in the dark with whatever was in that house. Grabbing my flashlight, I scrambled back up the stairs, my heart racing, the sound of my own panicked breathing filling my ears. When I burst into the foyer, I was met with darkness, the mansion's power flickering on and off, as if the house itself was struggling to keep its grip on reality. The whispers were back, now a cacophony of voices overlapping, rising in a sinister crescendo that filled the room. I turned in circles, trying to find the source, but they were everywhere, coming from the walls, the ceiling, even the floor beneath my feet. "Finish it! Finish what you started!" the voices chanted, growing louder, more insistent. My mind was unraveling, reality slipping through my fingers like sand. I stumbled through the dark, trying to find a way out, but the mansion had other plans. The corridors seemed to stretch and twist, leading me in circles, trapping me in an endless maze. My flashlight flickered, the beam cutting through the thick darkness in short, erratic bursts. And then I saw it, a door at the end of the hallway, one that I hadn't noticed before. It was slightly ajar, a dim light spilling out from the crack. Against my better judgment, I approached it, drawn by something I couldn't explain. The whispers grew louder, filling my head with an unbearable noise, drowning out all rational thought. I pushed the door open, revealing a room I had never seen before. It was small and circular, with walls lined with ancient, crumbling books. In the center of the room was an altar, and on it lay an old, dusty book, its cover engraved with strange, arcane symbols. The moment I saw it, I knew. This was what the house wanted. This was what the voices had been urging me towards all along. I stepped into the room, feeling the weight of the mansion's gaze upon me, the air thick with anticipation. My hands moved on their own, reaching for the book, opening it to a page filled with strange, indecipherable text. The moment I began to read, the room plunged into darkness, and the air was filled with a deafening roar, as if the mansion itself was screaming. The last thing I remember before everything went black was the sensation of something cold and slimy wrapping around my ankles, pulling me down into the darkness. The voices screamed in triumph, their chants turning to laughter as the mansion claimed me, dragging me deeper into its twisted, malevolent heart. I don't know how long I was out. Could have been minutes, hours, or even days. When I finally came to, I was lying on the cold, hard floor of that cursed room. My body ached all over, and my head throbbed with a dull, persistent pain, like someone had taken a hammer to my skull. The room was dark, except for a faint, flickering light that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere all at once. The book was still clutched in my hands, open to the same page, but now the symbols on the paper seemed to pulse with a life of their own, shifting and writhing as I stared at them. My mind was a blur, memories of what had happened mingling with the remnants of dark dreams that had plagued my unconsciousness. I remembered the voices, the cold grip around my ankles, and the feeling of being pulled into an abyss. But there was something else, too, a presence, dark and ancient, that had wormed its way into my thoughts, embedding itself in the deepest recesses of my mind. It was as if the mansion had opened up and let me peek into its rotting, black heart, and now it refused to let me go. I struggled to my feet, my legs trembling beneath me as I leaned against the wall for support. The room felt smaller, the walls closer than before, almost like they were closing in on me. The air was thick and stifling, each breath a struggle. I knew I had to get out, but as I turned to leave, I realized that the door, the only exit, was gone. Where it had once been was now just a solid wall, as if it had never existed. Panic gripped me, tightening its cold fingers around my throat. I stumbled around the room, desperately searching for any way out, but there was nothing. No door, no windows, not even a crack in the walls. I was trapped. The walls seemed to pulse, as if they were breathing, as if the house itself was alive, watching me, feeding off my fear. I could feel it, its malevolent presence pressing down on me from all sides, and for the first time since I had arrived, I truly understood that I was at the mercy of something far beyond my comprehension. The book, still in my hands, felt heavier now, almost burning against my skin. I didn't want to open it again. I knew that whatever was inside was dangerous, something that should never have been disturbed. But the pull was irresistible, like a compulsion I couldn't fight. Slowly, almost against my will, I looked down at the pages, the symbols now glowing faintly, casting eerie shadows on the walls. As I stared at the text, it began to make sense. Words that I shouldn't have been able to understand flowed through my mind, ancient and powerful, filling my thoughts with dark knowledge. It was as if the book was speaking to me, its voice a low, guttural whisper that vibrated through my bones. I could feel the presence in my mind growing stronger, its tendrils wrapping around my consciousness, squeezing tighter with each passing moment. I tried to resist, to push the book away, but it was too late. The mansion had me, and it wasn't going to let go. The more I read, the more the darkness seeped into me, filling the cracks in my mind, turning my thoughts into a twisted, chaotic mess. I could see things, horrible, unspeakable things, flashes of the mansion's past, of rituals performed in blood, of the Crowley family, their faces twisted in pain and madness, their souls trapped within these walls, just as mine was now. I heard the voices again, louder this time, echoing in my head, urging me to continue, to finish what I had started. I could see the mansion's true form now, not just the decaying structure it appeared to be, but the dark, pulsating entity it really was, a living, breathing thing that fed on the souls of those who entered, growing stronger with each victim it claimed. And then, the room began to change. The walls, once solid and unyielding, started to ripple, the surface undulating like water. I backed away, fear gripping me, but there was nowhere to go. The wall behind me was moving too, pushing me forward, closer to the center of the room. The floor beneath me shifted, the old wood groaning as if something massive was stirring beneath it. I felt it before I saw it, a cold, slimy tendril snaking out from the wall, wrapping around my ankle, pulling me down. I screamed, trying to kick it off, but more tendrils emerged, wrapping around my legs, my arms, dragging me down to the floor. The book fell from my hands, landing with a dull thud as I was pulled down into the cold, wet darkness. The walls seemed to come alive, pulsating with dark energy, their surface splitting open to reveal an endless void beyond. I was being pulled into it, into the very heart of the mansion. The voices reached a deafening crescendo, their words now clear, their meaning unmistakable. Join us, become one with us. I fought with everything I had, but it was no use. The mansion had claimed me, just as it had claimed so many others before me. As I was dragged deeper into the darkness, the last thing I saw was the book, lying open on the floor, its pages glowing with that eerie light. And then, everything went black. When I woke again, I was no longer in that dark, suffocating room. I was back in the mansion's grand foyer, sprawled on the cold marble floor. My body felt heavy, like I was made of lead, every muscle aching as if I had been in a brutal fight. The memory of those slimy tendrils dragging me into the void was fresh in my mind, but there were no marks on my skin, no bruises to explain the pain I felt. It was as if the house had spat me back out, but left a piece of itself inside me. The mansion was quiet now, eerily so. The oppressive silence pressed in on me, the whispers and groans that had plagued me before completely gone. For a moment, I wondered if I had imagined it all, if the house had finally decided to release me. But as I tried to push myself up from the floor, a sharp pain shot through my head, and I collapsed back down, gasping. That's when I noticed the changes. The foyer, once grand and elegant even in its decay, was different now. The walls, which had been cracked and peeling, were now covered in a thick, dark mold, pulsating with a life of its own. The air was heavy with the stench of rot, so strong it made my stomach churn. The windows, which had let in a faint gray light before, were now covered in grime, blocking out any trace of the outside world. The house had transformed, reflecting the darkness that had taken hold inside me. I managed to get to my feet, swaying unsteadily. My reflection in the cracked mirror across the room caught my eye, and what I saw made my blood run cold. It wasn't just the house that had changed, I had too. My face was gaunt, the skin stretched tight over my bones, my eyes sunken and hollow. I looked like I hadn't slept in weeks, maybe months, with dark circles under my eyes and a sickly pallor to my skin. But it was my eyes that scared me the most. They weren't just tired, they were wrong. The pupils were too large, swallowing up the color, leaving only a ring of blackness that seemed to pulse with the same dark energy that permeated the house. I stumbled back from the mirror, my heart racing, trying to convince myself that it was just the light, just the stress, just my imagination playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew better. The mansion had done something to me, changed me, and whatever I had become, it wasn't entirely human anymore. I needed to get out, to escape this cursed place before it finished what it had started. But as I moved towards the door, the house seemed to react, the walls creaking and groaning, the floor shifting beneath my feet. It was alive, aware of my every move, and it wasn't going to let me go without a fight. The front door, which had once stood open and welcoming, was now closed, the wood dark and slick with moisture. I grabbed the handle, but it was ice cold, freezing my fingers to the bone. I pulled with all my strength, but the door wouldn't budge, as if it was fused to the frame. Panic surged through me, and I threw my weight against it, desperate to escape. But the door remained unmoving, solid as stone. That's when I heard the voices again, faint at first, but growing louder with each passing second. They were coming from all around me, rising up from the floors, seeping through the walls, echoing in my head. "You're ours now. You belong to us." I backed away from the door, my heart pounding in my chest, sweat dripping down my face despite the cold. The whispers swirled around me, taunting me, pulling me deeper into the house. I could feel the presence in my mind growing stronger, wrapping itself around my thoughts, suffocating them. It wanted me to give in, to surrender, to become a part of the darkness that consumed this place. But I couldn't. I wouldn't. Not yet. There had to be a way out, some escape that I hadn't found yet. The house might have changed me, but I wasn't ready to let it win. I turned and ran, my footsteps echoing through the empty halls. The mansion seemed to shift around me, the walls stretching, the floors tilting, leading me deeper into its twisted heart. But I kept running, refusing to stop, refusing to give in to the terror that clawed at my mind. Room after room, I searched for something, anything that could get me out of this nightmare. But each one was more twisted than the last, filled with decaying furniture, walls covered in that same pulsating mold, and shadows that seemed to move on their own, reaching out for me as I passed. The house was alive, and it was hunting me, pushing me further into its depths, waiting for the moment when I would collapse from exhaustion and finally give in. But I wouldn't. I couldn't. Finally, after what felt like hours of running, I found myself in front of another door, one I hadn't seen before. It was different from the others, older, with strange symbols carved into the wood. The air around it was thick with a sense of dread, but there was also something else, something that felt like hope, like a way out. With trembling hands, I reached for the handle, half expecting it to burn me, or for the door to disappear as I touched it, but it didn't. The handle was warm, almost comforting, and it turned easily under my grip. The door creaked open, revealing a dark staircase leading down into the bowels of the mansion. I hesitated for only a moment before stepping through, knowing that whatever lay at the bottom of those stairs was my only chance. The door closed behind me with a soft click, sealing me in. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for whatever was to come, and began my descent into the darkness. The stairs creaked under my weight as I descended into the darkness. The air grew colder with each step, carrying a damp, earthy smell that made me think of graves long forgotten. The further down I went, the more I felt the weight of the mansion above me, pressing down, suffocating. My flashlight flickered, casting long, wavering shadows on the walls, which were lined with the same pulsating mold that seemed to infest every corner of this cursed place. I had no idea what I was walking into, but there was no turning back now. The door at the top of the stairs had closed, and I knew, without a doubt, that it wouldn't open again. Whatever this house wanted, it was down here, in the depths where the light of day could never reach. My footsteps echoed in the narrow stairwell, the sound amplified in the confined space, making it feel like something was following me, just out of sight. At the bottom of the stairs, I found myself in a long, low corridor. The walls were made of stone, rough and uneven, dripping with moisture. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the sound of water dripping somewhere in the distance added to the oppressive atmosphere. My heart pounded in my chest as I moved forward, my flashlight beam shaking in my trembling hand. The corridor seemed to stretch on forever, with no doors or windows, just that endless, suffocating darkness ahead. But I kept walking, driven by the same twisted compulsion that had led me here in the first place. The walls felt like they were closing in, the ceiling lowering, as if the mansion itself was trying to crush me. I could feel the presence in my mind growing stronger, its influence pressing down on my thoughts, making it harder to think, to resist. Then, up ahead, I saw a faint light. It was dim, barely more than a flicker, but it was the first sign of anything other than darkness that I had encountered in what felt like hours. I quickened my pace, drawn towards it like a moth to a flame, despite the gnawing fear in my gut. The corridor ended in a large, circular chamber, the walls lined with shelves filled with ancient, dust-covered books and jars filled with who knew what. In the center of the room was a massive stone altar, and on it lay an object wrapped in black cloth, glowing with that same faint, eerie light I had seen from the hallway. The air in the chamber was thick, almost tangible, vibrating with a dark energy that set my teeth on edge. I approached the altar, my heart hammering in my chest. As I got closer, I could see that the cloth was embroidered with those same strange symbols I had seen in the book earlier. They seemed to pulse with a rhythm of their own, almost like a heartbeat, drawing me in. I knew I shouldn't touch it. I knew that whatever was wrapped inside that cloth was the source of everything that had happened to me since I set foot on this island. But I couldn't stop myself. My hands moved on their own, reaching out to unravel the cloth. The moment I touched it, a shock of cold ran through my body, freezing me to the core. The cloth fell away easily, revealing what was hidden inside. An ancient, weathered book, much like the one I had found upstairs, but larger and bound in something that looked disturbingly like human skin. The cover was marked with the same arcane symbols, and as I stared at it, the words on the page began to shift, rearranging themselves into something I could almost read. A voice, deep and resonant, filled the chamber, vibrating through the stone and through my bones. It spoke in a language I couldn't understand, but the meaning was clear. The book wanted me to open it, to read the words inside, to complete the ritual that had been started long before I had arrived. I knew that doing so would seal my fate, that whatever was left of my soul would be consumed by the darkness that had taken hold of this place. But the compulsion was too strong. My hands moved of their own accord, flipping open the cover. The pages were blank at first, but as I stared, words began to appear, scrawled in dark, bleeding ink that seemed to seep up from the paper itself. They were in a language I didn't recognize, but somehow I could understand them. They spoke of sacrifice, of power, of binding souls to the will of something ancient and malevolent. I could feel the presence in my mind, urging me on, whispering promises of escape, of freedom. If only I would finish what had been started. The voices from earlier returned, rising in a chorus around me, filling the chamber with their sinister chant. My heart pounded, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I realized I was teetering on the edge of a precipice, about to plunge into an abyss from which there was no return. But then, as I stood there, book in hand, I felt something else, a flicker of resistance, a spark of the person I had been before I had come to this place. It was faint, almost drowned out by the darkness, but it was there. I knew that if I read the words, if I finished the ritual, I would be lost forever, swallowed by the mansion and the dark entity that controlled it. With a scream of defiance, I slammed the book shut, the force of it echoing through the chamber like a gunshot. The voices stopped abruptly, and the light in the room flickered, dimming until I was left in near total darkness. The presence in my mind recoiled, its grip loosening for just a moment, giving me the strength I needed to act. I turned and ran, back through the corridor, up the stairs, not caring where I was going, just desperate to get away. The mansion roared in fury, the walls shaking, the floor buckling beneath me as I fled. I could hear the voices screaming in anger, feel the darkness reaching out for me, but I kept running, my heart pounding, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I burst back into the foyer, and to my astonishment, the front door was open, the outside world visible through the gap. Without a second thought, I ran towards it, throwing myself through the door and into the cold, misty air outside. The moment I crossed the threshold, the door slammed shut behind me, the sound reverberating through the island. I collapsed onto the ground, gasping for breath, the cold air burning my lungs. The fog swirled around me, but I didn't care. I was out. I was free. But as I lay there, trembling, I knew that the mansion wasn't finished with me. I could still feel its presence in my mind, a dark seed planted deep within my thoughts. The house had let me go, but it hadn't let me escape. Not completely. I forced myself to my feet, staring back at the mansion. The fog had thickened, obscuring the building, but I could still see the faint outline of its dark, twisted form, looming over the island like a vengeful spirit. I knew then that I couldn't leave the island, not truly. The mansion would always be with me, a part of me now, its darkness etched into my soul. As I turned away and began the long walk to the dock, I heard the faintest whisper carried on the wind, a voice that chilled me to the bone. "You'll be back, Jack. You'll always be back." And deep down, I knew it was right. The mansion had claimed me, and no matter where I went, no matter how far I ran, it would always be there, waiting for the day I returned to finish what I had started. If you like this story, please subscribe, like, and comment, and be sure to check out the next story.